Well,
Well, welcome everyone to our and our 78th weekly company town hall.
Every quarter, we designate one of our weekly company town halls to actually invite all of our colleagues, friends, clients to share in a discussion on a current topic, as well as to share some joy with entertainment. And so we're actually broadcasting live today. This is a bit of a special treat from the Peter F. Drucker School of Management in Claremont, California, and actually from what I believe, Bernie, was Peter F. Drucker's office. Is that right?
Peter Drucker's office, right? Exactly. So very, very contemporary here in terms of our conversation today.
Incredible. So today we'll be discussing Drucker's book titled The 5 Most Important Questions with Bernie Jaworski, who holds the Peter F. Drucker Chair of the Drucker School of Management at the Claremont Graduate University. And this is Bernie's office.
Thanks, Ajay.
And so this book, though short, has had an incredible impact on many business leaders, including us at SMA. And before we get started, we want to make this interactive. Please use the chat window to make any comments as well as to ask questions. We'll try to get to all the questions as we finish up the discussion. So Bernie, can you tell us a little bit about this? Is a bit of an unusual book. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of the book and just give us a bit of a commentary?
Yeah, it does reflect Drucker's deep commitment to the nonprofit sector. Most of the time we spent in previous town halls been focused on for-profit enterprises, but Drucker in his career shifted to look at nonprofits pretty aggressively towards the last 20 years of his life. Now, the 5 questions we're going to explore today are intended to focus on social or nonprofit organizations, but the reality is, as we'll see with SMA, they relate to any organization, right? So when I reread the book in preparation for today, there's 2 themes that stood out. One is this notion of continually abandoning things that don't fit the environmental context anymore. This is a constant challenge for any organization. Now, what worked in the past is not going to work in the future, so therefore we need to start abandoning things to make room for innovation for the future. And the second theme that stood out was balancing continuity and change. A major problem for most organizations is to hit the targets in the short run and at the same time reinvent the firm over the long haul. So this balancing continuity and change, balancing short-term, long-term is a constant challenge for most organizations. So what I'd like to do today is actually focus on the 5 questions and turn our attention to SMA and see how they score themselves on each of these 5 questions. So our opening question for AJ is, what is the mission of SMA and what are his thoughts about that mission statement?
Great. Well, thank you, Barry. So this is going to be a bit of a test, and wherever you believe we can improve the answer, please, we'd love to get the feedback. So I think Peter F. Drucker actually said your mission should fit on a T-shirt, if I remember that correctly. And so I'll give everyone the T-shirt version. Bernie, our T-shirt version is we help companies improve their competitiveness. The longer version is that SMA offers advice and expertise across the full program lifecycle to help companies better position the markets that they're in, to pursue and win new business opportunities, and to perform profitably on the programs that they've won. And this has actually stayed constant for the 39 years of our firm. Yet I believe it's probably not as easily understood by some of our younger employees, that our employees have just started with us versus those who have actually watched and participated in the whole evolution of the firm. And I think what's key to that mission statement is we believe we're the only firm in the industry that we serve that can actually pull that thread all the way from helping a customer think about the markets they're in, to actually about what business opportunities to pursue, actually help them win those opportunities, and then to actually perform on those programs in a profitable way. And I think it's a complex concept, and I know we could probably actually improve on that in terms of how we can articulate it in a way that more of our employees can actually understand that.
Yeah, so I hear you talk, AJ, and I think of Goldilocks in the sense that the short version is any firm could say that, so that's not that distinctive. Okay. A mission has to be distinctive. It has to be unique to what you do, and so I'm a little worried about that one being too high level. Mm-hmm. The second one I really like because it's incredibly precise and it gets really at program, which is really kind of the focal point of what you guys do. But the problem is it's too complicated. There's too many words. There's too many notes. It's like the movie Amadeus where there's too many notes floating around here. So the question really is somewhere between that high level one and somewhere between the low level one is I think where you need to focus. The way that I oftentimes teach mission is I say, what is the critical benefit that you're getting when you work with SMA? So what is the critical benefit that customers are getting over the next 5 to 10 years? So a mission has to have legs. It has to have some currency that lasts for a period of time, right? So a classic issue right now in the automotive sector right now is people historically said, we're not an automobile company, we're a transportation company. That's what most companies said. But in the last 2 to 3 years, Daimler, Chrysler, BMW, Toyota have all focused on mobility. They moved away from transportation to talk about mobility.
Right.
And the reason they're doing that is obviously, what is a car and what is transportation, right? So the point we're trying to get at is what's the core benefit? Historically, automobiles have been transportation, they get from A to B. Mobility raises it kind of, there's an interesting question as to why they went to mobility, right? But the point I'm getting at is there equivalent word like mobility that gets at what we're trying to do here? And obviously, as we talk about customers and customers' values, we're going to pursue that issue. But I would say the second one feels, what I like about the focal point is the red thread through the entire life cycle. I think that's really important. And I think the idea of focusing on programs, I think that's really important. But I would encourage you to kind of shorten that second.
Yeah,
one, right?
and I think that when I say competitiveness, that's not an easily understood term. I mean, I'm glad you used the analogy of the automobile companies, because I think everyone understands mobility, right? And I think perhaps it's interesting, perhaps one of the motivations is they've gotten away from the fact that perhaps you have to own a car for them to give you mobility, right?
Yeah, I think that's an issue. And also the fact that also software is becoming the platform, right? So Tesla being the lead there. So there's something about what does mobility mean? Now, historically, we've always moved people or goods, and I'm not quite sure if they're planning to do something other than that. But I think it raises really interesting questions. Let's put it this way. You can imagine how many people hours went into that conversation, the shift from transportation to mobility. Right. So there's really something there. We may not be obvious to us as to what's there, but there really is something there. So so let's pause here to see if there's any activity in the chat room in terms of the conversation of Bernie's Goldilocks principles.
So I do have a question. So we talk about, this is the mission question, right? So how is a mission different than a purpose statement?
Yeah, it's a great question, BJ. We don't have time to pursue that today. No. So a mission should tell you what industry you're competing in and what is the underlying customer benefit that you're offering. The purpose statement really fundamentally is about how you're helping society function better. So a purpose is a higher order issue around why is it that we exist? What is it that we're contributing to society? How does society function better as a result of our existence? And that's why in the last 10 years, you've seen a lot of companies move towards purpose statements that didn't exist 20 years ago. 10 years ago, it existed, but right now, my armchair analysis is there's probably about 30 to 40% of Fortune 500 companies now have purpose statements right up on their website. And I would actually encourage SMA to think about this, because you are helping society function in fundamentals, in terms of safety, in terms of what, broadly conceived about what is making society more secure, more safe. There's really something there that I think is highly motivating for people that work with you as to what they're doing. So I would encourage you to actually think about a purpose statement. So we have to add a sixth question.
We do. Yeah. Okay. So should we move on to the second question?
Yeah. So the second question really is, who is the SMA customer? Now, the reason this is so interesting in the context of nonprofits is you say, well, who is the customer for a nonprofit? Well, is the customer the person that actually receives the social services? Is the customer some of the stakeholders that are involved? Is the customer the volunteer who donates their time, right? And so it's complicated in a nonprofit setting. It can be also complicated in a for-profit setting. So AJ, when you think about who's the customer of SMA, how would you respond?
Yeah, so I would say that implied in our mission statement is our customers are those companies that think of their businesses as a portfolio of programs, right? And so what is a program? Program has an obvious, definite beginning date and an end date. And a program essentially is defined as a set of activities which are, as a group, deliver a product or service for a specific objective that our clients, their customers want to achieve. And so the most obvious, our core client set are federal contractors, but we serve other companies beyond those, which are, and usually when you think about companies who are comprised as a portfolio of programs, for them to win those programs, it's a form of competition, right? And so the most obvious group are federal contractors, because they have to compete formally to win the programs that they execute on. And so their businesses are essentially comprised of whatever collection of programs that they've won, that they're executing against. Of course, executing well against those programs that enables them to even be more competitive to win the future set of programs. So that's how we think of as the common denominator across every one of our clients. We have clients across multiple industrial sectors, and not just federal contractors, but federal contractors that serve architect engineering, healthcare, defense, you name it. We also have B2B clients where those companies, some companies are actually like consumer goods companies, but they will also have a set of activities which are defined as a program. For example, companies are digitizing, are doing digital enablement, right? E-commerce. Those will be a specific initiative that has a start date and end date, and we are also assisting those types of companies on those programs.
So here, good news here, I rate you guys very highly here. So one of the real critical things that Drucker talks, when he says, what is the customer value? There's another way to interpret that question. What is our target customer value? In other words, you can't serve everybody, right? So the ability to articulate your target customer and to articulate the needs and benefits and motivations, attitudes and mindset of that target segment is absolutely critical here. And so he was focusing not just in terms of the collection of individuals inside of the client, but also what target market are you focused on? And what I like about what you just defined is you gave a very clear definition that it's program, that has a start time and an end time, and that programs have life cycles. I think it's a really nice focus for what you're doing. But I would encourage you then to stay within that, as they say on American Idol, you want to stay in your lane. And I think here you want to stay in your lane. I think if you start pivoting away from things that are not programmed, and it scares me a little bit when I hear you talk about, B2C and move towards B2C. It gives me a little bit of the heebie-jeebies when I hear that. But on the other hand, if it stays within program and that's the focal point, then I think you just need to deliver that message again and again and again, because the workforce may not see what you just said.
Right.
In other words, I think that's really crisp and clean, but I bet if I sampled 100 people inside of SMA and said, give me the target segment, I get 5 answers. Right?
You probably would. Yeah,
So
you probably would.
Yeah.
And somebody might say, well, defense and aerospace companies, somebody else might say health insurance companies, somebody else might say commercial aerospace companies, right? And I think how we've tried to reconcile that internally is what is the common denominator in those companies where we're helping them, and that common denominator happens to be a program, right? And I think it's again, just like the mission statement, I think it's a challenging concept. It's not a simple thing for us to articulate as our business. It's not a simple business. Even though if you go back to the car example, automobile companies, right? They aren't simple businesses, but they could probably articulate their mission statement and their customers in a much more crisp way than we can do it.
Yeah. But I absolutely like the way you're thinking about it. In your world too, the other thing is that I actually don't like it when people segment by verticals. I don't like people talking about verticals as their customer segment, because I always say, well, within the vertical, is there a wide variety of people, how people buy, what prices they buy at, what they want from your team? Is there a wide variety? There's a lot of heterogeneity. If the answer is yes, it's not a segment.
Yeah.
So the problem is that within a vertical, there are certain segments that exist.
Right.
And what you've articulated is a very specific way to think about vertical one, about how you play within aerospace and defense. But it just so happens that if you define it as program, you can go to vertical 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's not limiting you.
Exactly.
Right. So that's the beauty of how you're defining it.
And of course, our firm was born supporting aerospace and defense. And I think we had to kind of reconcile that ourselves as we expanded into additional verticals, right? In terms of what was it that what we did for aerospace and defense was effective for companies in other verticals, and the common denominator, I guess, was the program. That's a good point you made earlier about, well, don't serve those clients that don't fit into your definition. I think that was one of I've reread Peter's the 5 most important questions a number of times here just in the past month. And I think he makes a point that stick to your principles, don't serve clients that don't fit that definition.
Yeah. And that's hard to do,
Yeah.
And particularly if you're in business development sales and someone says, I'm willing to pay a ton of money. And you say, no, I don't want the money. So that's the challenge there. So let's go to our third question here around, okay, so we now know the target customer. We kind of know they're in the program space. We know there's a program life cycle to it. We know there's a beginning and end date. What are those customers looking for? What do they value? What's the benefit that they're looking for? Why do they buy from you? What exactly do you provide that's sort of unique and different relative to the next set of providers?
So I think each question gets subsequently a little bit harder to answer is the way I've been thinking about this. And so this is where it actually starts to get a little bit more difficult for us to articulate. I think for a third of our business, which is that upfront part of the business where we're helping companies think about their markets in new and different ways and how to be more competitive in those markets, that's our advisory business, right? We also do some advisory business on the program side throughout, but that's principally where our advisor. I think in that's part of our business. We believe our customers most value pragmatic advice that's delivered fairly quickly. They don't want to wait months in terms of helping them think through an issue they have, perhaps how to be more competitive in a market, and they want something that's very pragmatically oriented. I think, and then after that, it's thorough, that advice being based on thorough analysis and really independent, unbiased thinking. Now, for 2/3 of our business, where we're providing customers with actually expertise who are doing the work with our client. It's not advisory, it's actually execution, or as we might say, implementation oriented. I think there it's the value most is a very high level of competency amongst our folks who are supporting them on the programs. And this is the next one is really kind of the hardest thing for us to articulate, I think, not just to our employees, but also to our clients, which is a shared responsibility for outcomes. This is a core principle of the firm when it was founded, is that we're just not there to advise. We're just not there to kind of, check the box. We're really there to take on a shared responsibility for outcomes. And I think that the third element is our speed to need. We're really known for that. We've always had focus on that for 39 years. It's one of the reasons why we developed a top platform, is to actually improve our speed to need, so we can actually fulfill our clients' needs much more quickly. So how can we make that easier for people to understand, particularly our clients to understand?
Well, what's really interesting as we hear this conversation unfold is really within our broad segment of program lifecycle clients, the beginning and end, within that broad segment, there's actually two subsegments. One is the advisory practice, and one is this speed to need, kind of looking for implementation, execution, and kind of being looking after their best interest, jointly responsible for the outcome. Right. There's really two subsegments, and you got to recognize which one's which and kind of articulate, what the needs are within each of those. But I think it's a really interesting way to think about it, AJ. And again, I've known the business for several years now. That kind of feels right to me. I think you kind of got that right. The question really then becomes behind that is, as you tell that story, do people believe you're distinctive enough relative to competition? And so this is where, in any positioning statement, we always talk about reasons to believe. So you can be an airline, company and saying we have the best customer service. Every single airline says we have the absolute best customer service in the world. All 25, 30 global airlines say the same thing. We have the best customer service, right? Well, who does, right? And that then relates to what are the capabilities that you're building to deliver against those, right? And so what capabilities do you have around operations? What capabilities do you have around talent acquisition? What capabilities do you have around talent development? What capabilities do you have around empathy with clients? So it becomes a story of sort of the ability to kind of position yourself such that people believe that you guys are the only guys that can do these two things, or not the only, you can do better. So the question, what's your gut feel there, AJ? Is on both on the advisory side as well as on the execution implementation side. Are you feeling like you're distinctive enough in the market?
So I think on the advisory side, as we go to market on that part of our business, we can, in many cases, clearly articulate how we are different than our competition, but it's not, there are clients who have a hard time then actually, I think, understanding why that distinction perhaps makes a difference between us versus someone else, right? And so we could certainly do a better job there. I think on the expertise side, we're actually providing expertise. It's a bit easier for us to articulate because those are really meaningful things you can measure, like level of competency, speed to need. I mean, that it's just obvious whether you're providing the talent you need when the client needs it, or you're late to the game, right? So I think on the expertise side, it's much easier for us to articulate that, but on the advisory side, it is actually quite more difficult because not every customer, obviously, they have a different perspective. The buyer has a different perspective than the seller does always, right?
Completely.
And so sometimes, I know that when we're trying to close a deal, we're walking up what we would used to call these divergent ladders of inference, right? We say something because there's an implicit assumption behind what we think, how they're listening to it. And they respond and we don't understand how they're responding. I think sometimes we get into that situation where we're actually not able to articulate that uniqueness and the value.
Yeah, and there, of course, what Drucker would say would be, it may make sense to let customers tell you what they think they're getting. So let's hear it from the voice of the customer talking about it and talking about what they think you're getting. And it's always curious what you're buying, what you think you're selling and what they think you're buying. And I sort of, in my own experience, I feel like I get it right maybe 80% of the time, but it's always a surprise when someone say, that's like, wait, that's not what we do, And so it's amazing how often that happens. So I think the ability to kind of hear the voice of the customer.
I think, in fact, I think Peter F. Drucker said in this book that, in fact, the only buddy who can really tell you the answer is the customer.
Right.
And perhaps that's a good action for us to take, is we actually don't have, I think, a persistent, consistent way of asking our customers that question, or a set of questions around that. We do it periodically or occasionally, right, when we need to. Or when we feel that we may not be servicing the clients as well as we can, right? Delivering the value that we think we should be delivering. And I think that happens with a lot of companies, is that you don't have a consistent program to actually pulse your customer and give them the airspace to tell you.
Yeah, I think
here's
an interesting thing is that, what I've learned to do is, after I sell client work, is begin to implement the work and then wait 3 weeks. And 3 weeks in, I then say, hey, why did you, it was a beauty contest, there's a bunch of people competing. Why did you select this firm, our firm, instead of the other firms? That'd be really helpful for me to I don't want to lead the witness. I just want to hear what you think about why you selected us. And it may be the case you hear very consistent stories, but then again, there could be some interesting angles that are said there where you're not anticipating. But we don't typically do that. We typically implement and run, and we never ask
exactly
why did they buy us. It feels a little awkward too, because you're sort of saying, hey, why did I win? You tell me why I'm good.
No, and it does feel awkward. And I think sometimes you won, say, well, obviously we won because we delivered the value in the way in which we articulated it, right, versus actually hearing it from the customer.
So AJ, you said as we get further along, we get more difficult.
They are.
So the fourth question Drucker likes to ask are, what are results? Now, let me just pause for a moment. Keep in mind, when you're talking about a social or nonprofit and you're working with homeless or Meals on Wheels or other, you can see what is good. Is it that people are using the service, or they're enjoying the service, or they're using it as directed, or they're not using it? What is an outcome? What's a result? Where you're not looking at business metrics like, here's the financial target. So we could, in business, we could argue we have some clear financial metrics, but I'm just curious, when you think about results, and you have to think about the results you provide, well, what comes to mind as thoughts about results?
Yeah, I think for a part of our business, it is crisp and clear, and it's almost obvious to everybody, customer and us alike. So as an example, when we're helping a customer trying to win a formal competition for a program, well, either they win it or they don't win it. And if they don't win it, there's a million excuses or reasons why they don't win it. But at the end of the day, they've hired us to help them actually compete and win. And so the result is the result. And so it doesn't really matter kind of why the result perhaps didn't come out the way you want to do at the end of the day, because our service is to help them win, right? And so that is crisp and clear. Another part of our business where we're helping a client on the execution of a program, oftentimes our clients' customers are very much involved. They may be in trouble. They may be way behind schedule or way above cost. And they will bring us in, our client will bring us in to actually help them reset the program, re-baseline it so they can get back on schedule and understand, what the true cost is or how to reallocate the funds, right? And there, it's also pretty obvious. But I'd say maybe that applies to 50% of our business. The other 50% of our business is actually very difficult to measure, have a clear definition of results, perhaps other than whether the client was satisfied with what we delivered or not. And to some degree, I'm actually not satisfied with that answer, because we've got a part of our business which is very crisp and clear, and then another part which is a little bit on the vague side. So it'd be great for us to kind of find more meaningful ways on that half of our business where we can't clearly define it, how to actually think about it.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
I think, lots of times when people are looking to try and measure results, they don't measure results, they measure activities. So my good example of this is learning and development organizations. They typically look at what programs they're running. Here are the programs we ran this year. That's kind of a result. That's not a result. That's kind of what you did. The result is, what impact did it have on people's talent development? Well, how do I measure that? Well, that's a tough one, right? Is it the use of that information you gave them this year? Is their thinking patterns changed? So that's an interest. So is it thinking? Is it behavior? Is it in the present? Is it in the future? It's hard to kind of diagnose this, right? So, but it's very difficult to kind of track some of this stuff. But I do think the ability to spend more time in that second bucket is going to be critical for you. I'm perfectly fine with some good customer measures, but maybe satisfaction is too general to measure. I'm not sure there's more ways to get at the underlying value providing and what they're looking for. So maybe it's a more precise articulation of what the customer is hoping to get and whether you've met those 3 or 4 key things they're looking for. We may go back to how it is that you're thinking about the earlier conversation, what do they value, and translating that into some metrics for that second group.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. If we don't really have a clear way of understanding the value, then how do you know if you're delivering it right in terms of results?
Yeah, exactly. Minor detail there, right? All right. So let's, our last question here is a really interesting one. And by the way, we're looking at the chat room and we don't see a lot of activity. So we're wondering whether in fact you guys are still there. We're delivering a program and there's nobody here, which is not a good sign. So we now covered 4 themes. We're going to monitor the chat room. I'm going to ask AJ the last question. We'll play around a little bit with that, and then we'll sort of go to the chat room.
Please just offer comments and questions. And so it looks like there may be some questions coming in, which is fantastic. Great.
Right,
so this last one, Bernie, is a really tough one.
Yeah. So this is the last Drucker questions. So what's your plan? I mean, if you don't have a plan, that's highly problematic. And you may have plans that are not precise enough. So, what does a good plan look like is a good question here. But AJ, I can anticipate where we're going here, but let me just ask the question of SMA and plans.
Yeah. So I actually found this to be the most interesting. And really, I found it a little bit in itself interesting that this is one of Peter's 5 questions. I didn't expect it in the book. So I think it's because if in the absence of a plan, right, then it says that the firm has no set of activities that are specifically organized to try to help the company achieve its mission. And so I kind of connected dots. Now I understand, right? So I think when I tie it back to the mission, I think we definitely really had a plan in the early days of the firm as the firm was really growing rapidly. But I think today, other than perhaps our most recent initiative around development of top platform, I would say our plan is very implicit in terms of the set of activities that we engage in on an everyday basis and that are presumed to be all oriented towards achieving our mission. I think, occasionally we have some new initiatives like the top platform, and we clearly have a plan for those, but we don't have a deliberate written down plan that says, okay, so if this is our mission, here's what we continue to need to do in terms of setting milestones and schedules against that will help us continue to maintain how well or improve how well we meet our mission. I think this is probably a good time for us to actually create one.
So this is fascinating, right? This is going to cause me a lot of anxiety. Sitting and watching this unfold here. I may ask him to repeat the answer where he says we do have a plan, and we just not disseminated yet. Maybe the right answer to the question. Okay, so let me lay on some Drucker thinking and see what you think. So what Drucker would say would be, if you're going to develop a plan, you're going to want to have 2 or 3 goals this coming year. 2 or 3 goals for the next 3 to 5 years, 2 or 3 goals for the next 10 years. In other words, not 27 goals, 2 or 3 goals, that's it. And then the question is, what are the activities that we're engaged in this year to deliver against those goals, right? So it's a very, you can imagine, a one-page plan, here are the 5 activities for this goal, here are the 5 activities for goal 2, here are the 5 activities for goal 3, we're done, right? And then we have to implement, execute a lot more detail behind it. But let me ask this question, let me reframe what I just said. If I gave you that exercise to do, right, and you go off in a conference room, here are the 3 goals this year, here are the 3 activities for each of these goals, and you go off to conference room A, and let's say we had Jock with us today, and we had Jock off in another conference room writing down his 3 goals and writing down 3 activities.
And Jock's our chief operating officer.
And by the way, these guys they're joined at the hip. So whenever I see, in fact, I don't think there's AJ or Jock. I think it's AJ Jock. It's basically, it's like, it's kind of like, it's Sonny and Cher of the defense industry. So, but the question would be, do you think if I said, here are 2 or 3 goals this year, here are some activities for each of those goals, and we sent you off in different rooms, and we gave you a half hour, and you came back, what % of overlap will we see? And by the way, these are the folks that interact all the time at the top of the hierarchy. That's true. Right? So that's true. I would expect a 90% overlap.
So I think, and again here, I think if the focus is the plan is what's your plan as it's relative to your mission, right?
Right. Okay.
So I think we'd probably have about a 70% overlap, 75% overlap around the goals. We'd probably have less overlap around the set of activities that we would then plan out to meet those goals. And that's where I actually where the Jacques AJ team really works well, because we think differently about those things, right? Yeah.
That's actually valuable. Yeah. That's kind of interesting, right? And the debate is going to be important, right?
Yes.
Drucker always said that whenever you went to a meeting and there was 100% agreement in the first 5 minutes, cancel the meeting and come back 2
Right.
days later because you're not getting enough diversity of a viewpoint, not kind of pushing around the issues, not having a devil's advocate say, wait, let's go a different way, right? So
what did he call it? Productive dissent or something? He had a term for it.
Yeah, it's escaping me right now, but it was something like that. Yeah, but think of it as devil's advocate. Think of it as the minority point of view, whatever, however you want to frame it, right? So we have another 3 or 4 or 5 minutes actually together before we move on to other parts of the program. So we'd love to field a couple of questions at this point. And what's going to happen is you're going to hear the voice of God read one of the questions to us right now. And God is female, so you kind of just know where we're kind of going from a gender perspective. So we'd love to hear a question at this point.
Yeah. Are your customers international, global, or USA only?
Yeah, so I guess this is obviously oriented towards SMA. So our customers are predominantly US, but we do have a small set of customers that are in UK, Western Europe, some in the Middle East. We do have many of our customers in the US operate internationally, so that gets us exposure to helping them, assist them in their markets internationally.
Another one. Going forward, remote workforce will likely continue and may even grow. What are your thoughts on this impact, real and perceived value for customers?
Why don't we ask Bernie this?
Well, I was just sitting back down relaxing. I thought my job was done. Okay, so
because you see this impact a lot of other companies, right? Yeah.
Okay, so let's take our poster child, Amazon, because I feel like every week Amazon makes an announcement that says we're going to go, not going to go fully remote, and they make an announcement, and the workforce then retaliates, then say, whoa, we were just kidding. Now we're going to do 3 days, we're going to 2 days, and then another memo goes out, and the workforce revolts, and you know where they are now actually is they're giving a lot of discretion. They're basically saying different positions within, so there could be somebody who's fully remote, you know, and there could be people that want to come back to the office. There is question around physical distance and whether you want people living within a certain number of miles. So if you do call in, you actually can't live, you know, you can't be living in Colorado, you know. So there's a really interesting debate that's sort of unfolding. I think the fascinating thing is the power shift. The power shift away from the hierarchy of the organization dictating what's going to happen to the workforce now feeling empowered to have a voice around what's going to happen. And so I'm going to argue that this remote workforce is the canary in the coal mine early signal about the power of the workforce dictating terms of how we're going to work, where we're going to work, how we're going to get paid, when we're going to get paid, all that. So I'm going to argue, yeah, we are going to have a change. We are going to see it determined by the workforce more than the senior management, I think. Doesn't mean there's not firms leaning in around this, but just this week, there was an article in the New York Times on investment banking, which is basically work all the time.
Right.
And they have right now, they had before the pandemic, 80% of the workforce was in the office 100 hours a week, and now it's 27%. And so, and by the way, they had their best year ever. So the investment, you know, the industry has best year ever. So are we going to see the return to work? No, we're not going to. So, but I think that power shift is the real interesting theme here, as opposed to remote work per se.
Yeah, I think this is maybe the ultimate test of what Peter Drucker talked about initially about the knowledge worker, right? And how companies are going to make the shift to really acknowledge whether or not they're going to think of their workforce as knowledge workers or not.
And in fact, that issue of, and he said power was going to go to the person that had knowledge. That was where the power goes, right? So this notion of, in fact, I mean, I've been doing interviews with CEOs, and there's CEOs in like Iowa who are losing some of their IT workers to folks in Silicon Valley, because the Silicon Valley folks are saying, why not just hire the guys from Iowa and pay half the rate? Right. And the guy in Iowa was saying, well, I get a 50% raise. Perfect. I'm happy to live in Ames, Iowa. I just double my compensation. I don't have to go anywhere.
I think that's called arbitrage on both parties.
It is. Yeah. So we are running up against our time deadline. We have time for one more question, I think, and then we'll shift gears.
Great.
Does SMA have strategic operating objectives that guide your plan?
Wow, these are not softball questions, are they? we actually do. And so, and this is something which it's not that we have an annual process to create those. It's actually something. So this is my version 2.0 at SMA. I came back about 8 years ago after having been with the really early founding years of the company. And it's actually something which we think about the firm on a continual basis. And so we've actually implemented a huge amount of change in the firm in the 8 years that we've been here. It's been great to see all of our leadership team and all of our workforce kind of move along with the change. But we do actually have very specific objectives. both kind of in all parts of our business. And what we don't have is what we just talked about is Peter F. Drucker's fifth question, which was the deliberate, written down plan against some of those. We do for very large initiatives, but I think when Peter, and I'm still struggling a little bit with that fifth question because it's mission oriented, right? And so the question is, how detailed does the plan have to be? Yeah. You have to be really choiceful about the things you put in the plan because it really needs to be mission oriented, not tactically oriented. And that's, I think, where the challenge is going to be.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said. So AJ, what else do we have on our program today?
So, it's going to be some fun. We actually, in fact, first of all, thank you, Bernie, so much for joining us. This has been quite a treat to actually be here in your office and what was Peter F. Drucker's office. So next, we actually have what has become the most popular segment of our weekly town halls. So this is going to be our 78th Art Talk with Sarah Kane. And we actually have decided to do something a little bit unusual with this one. So I'll actually let Sarah introduce what we're going to do. Sarah, let's highlight Sarah. Fantastic. Hello,
Hi,
Sarah.
everyone. So thank you for that wonderful talk on Peter Drucker. So we'll actually be, instead of focusing on an artist this week, we will be talking about a little bit of an overview and a background of Peter Drucker and some of his more popular books. So let me share my screen with you all and we will get started. So Peter Drucker was an Austrian-American management consultant. He was an educator and an author whose writings contributed to the philosophical and practical foundations of the modern business corporation. He was born in 1909 and grew up in what he referred to as a liberal Lutheran Protestant household in Austria-Hungary. His mother studied medicine and his father was a lawyer and a civil servant, so he grew up in a household where intellectuals, scientists, and political leaders would meet up to discuss new ideas. After World War I, he moved to Germany to pursue more employment opportunities, and while in Frankfurt, he earned a doctorate in international law. He subsequently moved to London, where he worked for an insurance company and also as the chief economist for a private bank. So he clearly has a wealth of experience in many different fields, and this was perfect for his next career move. He relocated to the US with his wife and was a professor of management as well as a business consultant and freelance writer. So we'll be looking at some of the many books that he's written over the course of his life. So in the middle of the slide, you can see Drucker's certificate of naturalization to the US, which happened in 1943, and his book, The Practice of Management, which was published in 1954. So The Practice of Management popularized the concept of management with objectives for the successful execution of an organization's strategic plan. So it talks about how, quote, the manager is the dynamic, life-giving element in every business who defines the organization's mission, develops and retains productive teams, and sets goals. So kind of what Bernie and AJ have just been talking about. He had this idea, the management by organization, or MBO, and it helped managers organize and motivate their employees and promote effective communication. And this book is particularly famous because it was the first of its kind to really look at management as a whole and being a manager as a separate responsibility within a business. So while the practice of management kind of defines who a manager is and their role in a given company, managing for results defines how to manage a business. The full title of this book is actually Managing for Results, Economic Tasks and Risk-Taking Decisions. And this book is split into three parts. Part one is understanding the business. Part two is focus on opportunity. So that's building strengths and finding new potential. And then there's part three, which is a program for performance. So in this book, he's really laying out more of a game plan for a manager to follow in order to find efficiency and success within their business. And then some background on the photo on the left is that in 1971, Drucker came to California and created the first executive MBA for working professionals at the Claremont Graduate School. And the university's management school was officially named the Peter F. Drucker Graduate School of Management in his honor in 1987. So in 1966, Drucker published The Effective Executive, which discusses what exactly being an executive entails and the 5 pillars which make them effective leaders to others within the company and how they can best serve that company as a whole. So the main pillars of an effective executive are building on strengths, knowing the value of their time, making effective decisions focusing on outward contributions and concentrating on a few major areas that deliver outstanding results. Kind of like what Bernie was talking about, making 2 or 3 goals a year instead of 27 goals a year. So for decades, Drucker was widely regarded as the dean of this country's business and management philosophers, according to a Wall Street Journal article. And these pictures are from the convocation at St. John's University in 1996. In 1972, Drucker published Management, Task, Responsibilities, Practices. So this book, in Drucker's words, tries to equip the manager with the understanding, the thinking, the knowledge, and the skills for today's and also tomorrow's jobs. This was written after years of experience teaching management skills and also being involved in the day-to-day managerial aspects of multiple companies over the course of his life. Drucker discusses the tools and techniques of successful management practice that have been proven effective, and he makes them meaningful and really easily accessible. And on this slide, we can also see his cover on World Executives Digest magazine in 1987. These black and white photos are from that same ceremony at Claremont Graduate University from 1987. And his book, Innovation and Entrepreneurship, was published in 1985. So a lot of times we think of the words innovation and entrepreneurship as these kind of lofty ideas, kind of these untouchable things that you can't really grasp. But in this book, Drucker really gives concrete tools to achieve these goals and concepts. Innovation and entrepreneurship explains what established businesses, public service institutions, and new ventures need to know and what they need to do to succeed in today's economy. So Managing the Nonprofit Organization was published in 1990 and addresses the rapidly growing sector of nonprofits and how to effectively manage them. As Bernie also mentioned, Drucker took a turn to really focus on nonprofits in his career. Drucker provides explanations of mission, leadership, and goals, and the book also includes interviews with 9 experts that talk about key issues in this sector. And here's a little quote from the book. Quote, "The nonprofits are the American community. They increasingly give the individual the ability to perform and to achieve. Precisely because volunteers do not have the satisfaction of a paycheck, they have to get more satisfaction out of their contribution. They have to be managed as unpaid staff. But most nonprofits still have to learn how to do this, and I hope to show them how, not by preaching, but by giving successful examples." And the photos on this slide are from Drucker's 90th birthday. So the 5 most important questions you will ever ask about your organization is what Bernie and AJ just discussed, and it's a self-assessment guide that's crucial to an individual or an organization that's committed to becoming a leader. The 5 questions are, and they kind of went through this specifically with SMAs, what is our mission? Who is our customer? What does the customer value? What are our results? And what is our plan? Drucker says that answering these 5 questions will fundamentally change the way you work, helping you lead your organization to an exceptional level of performance. And the photos are from a Drucker Institute conference in 1998. The Essential Drucker is a condensed compilation of Drucker's ideas, starting from the practice of management that we talked about, published in 1954, all the way up to management challenges for the 21st century, which was written in 1999. And in his own words, Drucker says that this book is a coherent and fairly comprehensive introduction to management and gives overview of my works on management and thus answers a question I've been asked again and again: which of my writings are essential? And finally, we have the Daily Drucker, which is exactly as it sounds. This book contains 366 daily readings that cover a large range of Drucker's concepts and ideas. And at the bottom of each page, there are actionable steps on how to incorporate the daily reading into practice. So overall, Drucker published 40 books throughout his life, as seen in this collage. And shortly before he died in 2005, Peter was celebrated by Businessweek magazine as the man who invented management. He was a consultant, a teacher, a writer, and there's also the Global Peter Drucker Forum, which is held annually. He was given many awards during his life, including the Grand Gold Decoration for Services to the Republic of Austria in 1991, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2002. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Sarah. That was really fascinating. Bernie, I kind of moving, that was actually quite fascinating to learn a bit about his life and about all the books and the sequencing of that. But there's actually a component about actual art, and he was actually a collector of fine art as well, I think,
He was
right?
a collector of Japanese art. He had an extensive collection of Japanese art, and he actually taught one of the classes here on Japanese art here at Claremont. So he was deeply interested in art and deeply committed, particularly to Japanese art. He'd done a lot of consulting in Japan in the 50s and 60s. And the rumor was that he'd actually take some of the consulting fees in art. So yeah, we could have reviewed his Japanese art collection. Maybe that's for another time.
That's for another time, maybe our next global town hall. Is the collection in a museum here on campus?
I honestly don't know
Uh-huh.
what happened to it and whether it was where it is right now and whether it's still as a collection or whether it's been disbanded, but I bet you we could do some research to find out.
It'll be fun to find out, actually.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. That was truly fascinating. Let's move on to our last segment. Let's welcome Colin Moulton. Colin has worked with Robin Williams, Ron White, Dave Chappelle, the greats. He has his own comedy special on Showtime and has been featured on Comedy Central. It's great to have you back, Colin. It's just fantastic to have you on these. And so let's give a big hand to Colin.
Oh, I got to unmute. Hey, everybody. Nice to see you. You can hear me now? Can everybody hear me?
We can hear you.
Yay. Everybody unmute and come with me. Listen, this was a really great meeting and topic. I think one of the problems, though, is I'm going to take a stab at the history part of this. Peter Drucker had a brother named Paul Drucker who was actually he was like the black sheep. And he got ahead of this whole before Stephen Covey, Stephen Covey wrote The 7 Habits of the Highly Successful Person. And that was actually, he was hacking Paul Drucker. Paul Drucker wrote the book that changed my life. Because I feel like the successful people have been served far too much with these books and these ideas of how to be more successful, and no one was serving who I thought I fit into, which is this like giant swath of mediocre. And so I found this book by Peter Drucker, the black sheep of the Drucker family, The 7.5 Habits of Highly Mediocre People. So I'm going to break down some of this. It's a guide for failure with the least amount of effort possible. So let's do this. Number 1, habit 1, the umbrella of self-doubt. This will protect you. Doubt yourself. There's a pretty good chance you're not good enough. There's 8 billion people on the planet, and you think you're the one? I don't know. Most things are really, really hard and they take a super long time. Now, if you have your neighbor's Wi-Fi and your siblings' Hulu and Netflix, there's no time for all that. You don't have time to, there's the new season of Curb, there's Ted Lasso, and it's never a bad time to rewatch The Tiger King, you know? So umbrella of self-doubt, that's habit number 1. Now stay with, you can write these down if you want to. Some of you may know this and probably have the book. Okay, number 2, the harder they fall. This one is super important. You focus on successful people who have ultimately failed in the end. This gives you a bulletproof rationalization for chilling at the starting blocks and not even worrying. Why go to all the effort? Imagine you build and grow and create this giant business and family and community and only to have it amount to nothing. Think. You already are nothing. The quickest way from mediocre to mediocre is a straight line. So who's the genius now, Cubby? See? Okay. It reminds me of the old adage, which I was going to memorize it, but I never got around to it. That's it. That's the adage, actually. I didn't learn the adage just because I just didn't get around. I forgot, whatever. I didn't have things to do. But the successful guy didn't have time to learn the adage because he was building an empire or meeting with the board or reassessing his goals. We both don't know the adage, but I didn't have to do anything to not learn it. Do you see what I'm saying? This is crazy like a fox. This guy, Paul. 2.5, habit number 2.5, fake it till you don't make it. I write this one down. You have to have something to tell people when they ask you what you're up to. Come up with a list of things that you're going to do sometime in the future. The future is your friend as a mediocre person. You want to talk about it a lot. You don't want it to show up ever, but you want to talk about it. Use terms like in the works and couple of things cooking. People love those terms. Keep it vague, hard to pin down. You don't want the motivated people to try to give you stuff to do that relates to your goals. So this helps the people in your life feel better. This is what you're doing, because they don't want your inaction. They're scared of it. They don't want you to not do anything. They're going to try to help you if they see that. So you don't want them to get involved in the inaction. You could just this way they can just say he's okay. He's got some irons in the fire. They love those expressions. This way they don't have to get involved at all. They could just they're not scheduling interventions and feeling bad for you. This is for them. This is altruism for the mediocre. Think of it that way. Speaking of that, I noticed you guys talked about Peter and the nonprofit is the American community. And I think that's what he was trying to say. It was a backhanded way of saying, I'm a nonprofit. I don't do anything. I try not to do. So that's what he's getting at. He really did believe in what his brother was writing about. So he had, obviously his bread was buttered on the other side, but you know what I'm saying? So number 3, don't rock the boat. Okay. You may accidentally end up with a job. This has happened before. I know it sounds crazy. Say a friend of yours figures out that you're doing nothing. Okay, they hate this. So she's got another friend who owns a blah, 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 and they're hiring for the blah, 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 or whatever. And then she gets you the job. So now you don't even have to do anything to get the job. So now she's made it easier for you to take the job than to not take the job. But our credo is what? Inaction. So we have to take the job. We're forced into doing the job because it's the easiest route. It's a nightmare. I've had it happen. You're in the workplace now. You're out of your element. Be careful here. Keep your head down. Don't say things. Change is bad. If you complain, they'll think it's motivation or something. They're looking for this. This is what they want. Okay, they'll promote you or they'll give you a more responsibility, more money. It's a trap. Remember the goal. Stay on task. Failure with as little effort as possible. Okay. Now, number 4. Why do now what you can never get around to doing later? Right? Procrastination. This is the cornerstone of mediocre life. Always be thinking, what should I be doing right now instead of what I should be doing right now? This was one of the biggest quotes that Paul lived by. It's simplest and most effective habit to create, especially nowadays because of all the distractions. If you can't find a distraction in today's technological world, there's no hope for you to have no hope. Do you see what I'm saying? Our mediocre ancestors had to distract themselves with dirt and rocks, and they still pulled it off. They didn't have the internet. There were plenty of losers. My great-great-grandfather was a mediocre loser before the invention of the bicycle. Okay, that was 2 wheels and a seat. He couldn't think of that. That's how little this guy had going. It's all he had to do. 2 wheels and a seat. Could have been the guy who invented the bicycle. Didn't do it. That's how effective he was at doing nothing. He must have been a master. So don't tell me it's hard to do nothing in the world where we're living, where everything has been invented and Shameless is still on and you can watch it anytime. If you can't do nothing, you're not even trying. That's what I say. Okay. Habit number 4.6, too much of a good thing is. Be indulgent, eat and drink everything. The worse, the better. The better it tastes, the more it makes you sick and tired. And this is good to be tired. Then people say, no, get your rest. They don't make you do things. This is why it works. So be indulgent. I call it working up a nap. That's what I call it. When you're not at your best, people don't want you to do things. They'll tell you, chill. Napping is a great way to do nothing, okay, while technically doing something. You can't put do nothing on your to-do list, can you? But put a nap there at 1:30, fits right on the calendar. Heck, another one at 4. See where I'm headed now? So now we're really starting to reach our goal. And this is where I got excited in the book. 5.2, okay? This is habit 5.2. Stay disconnected. In our world, this requires a great deal of prep and terminology. Always buy low-end devices with bad service plans. Then use words like software updates and sunspots and out of range and between towers. I mean, you got to know these words, you know? This should make it very difficult for the motivated people to trap you into doing things. Okay. Now, 6.4, loose usage of the word family. This is one that a lot of people get hung up on genetics for family and like spouse or brother, uncle. No. Maybe you have a neighbor. Maybe you have a neighbor who likes to sit in the garage and do nothing. He seems cool, right? And maybe you could sit there with him and do nothing and just do nothing together. And he's right there by your house. So he's kind of like extended family. So hanging out in the garage, doing nothing, that's a family function now. See? So that trumps everything. If somebody's like, hey, I need you to, no, I got a family function. Oh, be with your family. Please. Family's important. That's what they'll say. So now you have extended family. So this is the last one. And I think it's very important. 7.5, habit 7.5, shelving. You got to get good at shelving. Get really, really good at shelving ideas because they'll come up. You may accidentally come up with good ideas. Say you're sitting in your extended family's garage, okay? You're doing nothing, having a couple of beers, family function. You're both good at doing this, so you're going to start talking about stuff you're going to do later because you're doing what you do, right? Now, all of a sudden, a good idea comes up. Immediately shelf it and feel the relief. All the work it was going to take to do that thing now is gone. And that feels incredible. I've had so many, I would have like events where I'd have all my mediocre friends come over and we just come up with ideas and then shelf them. It's amazing. We come out of there with nothing. So in conclusion, I think you're going to be fine. I think you're all going to be great at this. Many of you have already gotten started. I've been with you a while. I know this. You truly are the brave ones, the ones who have already gotten started in a world where innovation is touted as the answer to the age-old question, why are we here? You know the real answer, to do nothing. It is when we are at our best. So keep your gas tanks empty and your Todd profile low. I'm Colin Moulton, and I've got to go because I've got a thing.
Hey, Colin, that was hilarious. Now we're all going to be waiting for the daily Colin to be published, so we get the rest of all these habits, one for every day.
That was so fun to do, AJ.
Exactly. What a great concept. Love it. Thank you so much.
Let me tell you the
Colin.
irony of it. It took me forever.
Now for almost 2 years, so it's great to have you back at these global town halls and just kind of bring some joy to our lives. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining us at our global town hall, our fourth one, and we will be having another one probably sometime, I'm guessing February, March. So please stay tuned for the email announcement on those. And if you'd like to actually join any of our company weekly town halls, just let us know. You can reach us at info@smawins.com, and we're happy to add you to our invitation list. And thank you, Bernie, for joining us. That was a fascinating session.
It was great to have you visit the Drucker School,
Yes.
pay the pilgrimage. So
yes, indeed.
Next up is Japanese art. I got to track that one
I
down.
think that's going to be fascinating.
I have a to-do, but maybe I should not. I should release that thought. And if I want to be mediocre, I should just release the idea. I'm going to take action on that and give it to somebody else. That's my lesson.
Shelve it, Bernie. Shelve it.
Shelve it.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. It was truly a pleasure. Thanks for spending the time with us.